So I looked through the crack in the door, kept my eyes in one place, and I literally said in my head, like, go on, and if it's real, show me. That would be amazing. And exactly where I was looking. So it wasn't like, oh, like you would see a shooting star. Exactly where my eyes were resting, there was this bright blue, like a bloom, if you like, about 20, 25, something like that years ago. My mum became a psychic medium. Again, to use a Jacques Vallée term, this kabuki theatre of the shadow puppetry or Plato's cave, where we are seeing a performance, if you like. But there was definitely that call and response, and that's what really, like Bob Lazar says, if you create a dense enough gravitational field, like if you think about Interstellar, the view around the black hole,
Yeah.
then he said that it lenses light anyway. So you might see a saucer with your eyes, but the light is just gonna flow around it like a drop of water going around the side of a glass. And the end effect is that you either don't see anything or it's a distortion or a refraction.
The following is my conversation with Thomas Vernon. Tom is a regular contributor musically to the UAP Files, as well as a co-host on the UAP Files podcast. With a music background and a history in hospitality, Tom switches between living in the UK and in Spain. Tom has a keen interest in the esoteric, particularly the field of consciousness and spirituality, and its connection to the UAP field and science as a whole. Tom is my friend and has helped me massively along the way with the UAP Files, as well as setting up our Discord, running it, and engaging with our community on Discord, for which I am hugely appreciative of. A really cool guy. I hope you enjoy this one. I certainly did. So the following is my conversation with Tom Vernon. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different because we kind of know each other a bit, and we've talked about UFOs quite a bit before. But I'm going to flip it around a little bit because the last time you asked me lots of questions when we did season 1 roundup, and it's now my turn to kind of get my own on you or get my own. So I'm quite keen to know what first piqued your interest in UFOs, UAP.
Oh, right. Okay. That is such a great question. I really like the way that you asked that from all these people of different fields because it's that point, that switching point, isn't it? First of all, you're just gonna have to excuse me because I'm full of cold, so I'll be sipping tea and whatnot throughout. But so it started with me. I had a bit of a weird background anyway because about 20, 25, something like that years ago, my mum became a psychic medium out of the blue, unexpectedly. So, as her thing developed and that new road that she was going down got bigger and bigger, I was experiencing um, this different side of life and that things that I had thought I had been very skeptical of. I was having proved to me that there was something there, something beyond our understanding of the current world. Um, but then to bring it back to UAP, it was during lockdown. Um, I was working in the hospitality industry in a hotel, and I was getting back quite late at night. But I saw on YouTube um, a video interviewing. It was on some morning television news broadcast, and it was interviewing these four different guys who initially didn't know each other. They met themselves through this independently shared experience, where they had said that weirdly they would be sat in the garden or praying or something like that, or basically like sending gratitude upwards, and they would see something in the sky. Now, this is sort of lockdown time, so that's to me that's basically what we call CE5 now, because it seems to be certainly the same mechanism of communication. So, very long story short, I got back from work one night and I was really really tired, and I thought, and it was on my mind because these guys hadn't been colluding their stories, but they'd all had a really similar experience. So I thought, with kind of my background and knowing what wonders, I was like, I'm going to try it. So I pulled up outside my house, um, opened my driver's door just a little bit, and just before I got out of the car, I thought, right, bugger it. Now's as good a time as any. It's a starry night. So I looked through the crack in the door, kept my eyes in one place, and I literally said in my head, like, go on, and if it's real, show me. That would be amazing. And exactly where I was looking. So it wasn't like, oh, like you would see a shooting star. Exactly where my eyes were resting, there was this bright blue, like a bloom, if you like. Imagine like an LED flashing really slowly, just a woof, and it was about probably the size of your thumbnail. So you're looking at comparable size to the moon. So that was completely uh, paradigm changing for me. And I've always I've always kind of had whatever is my hobby becomes my obsession. So when I was little, I was obsessed with dinosaurs and then military planes and all that kind of thing, and I could name every single one. So when that happened, I was just like, right, internet, I want to know everything. And that started the whole thing off really. And then of course you see Commander Fravor on Lex Friedman. That was my first experience of them talking about UFOs and stuff like that, and it just kind of rabbit holed from there. Snowballed, as they say. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What did you find was it so once you were kind of hooked on it and you kind of you've had this sighting, you've
Yeah.
had a few kind of strange experiences and in as much as a feeling to look, and then you had you looked and then you had the sort of sighting, so you're having these things kind of happen to you.
Yeah.
Where do you go from there? What you say sort of rabbit holes, but do you go online? Are there certain websites or are there places that you kind of thought I'm going to go and check this out, and then that sent me over here, and you've gone to
Yeah.
different places?
Well, so I actually had two weird. Obviously, as you can imagine, I wanted to try it again,
Yeah.
and I was really, really keen. What I will say about it, I mean, obviously, it's kind of like tuning an instrument, and that's something that I'm fascinated by anyway, sound and music. And but it seems to be kind of purposefully hit and miss. And I know Jack Valet talks about that, but there was definitely that call and response, and that's what really um, sort of smashed through a load of windows for me because it's not like I had just observed a weird little spaceship, because that could be a military thing, it could be an inanimate object, it could be a bird, it could be anything. The fact that it was that incredibly personal thing, and I had gone, go on then, and then saw it because I do look at the sky a lot anyway. That was really weird. The second time, um, I used to stream quite a bit on Twitch and play video games. I still do, but I was playing a game and having a great time, and I can't um, describe it very easily, but I just got in my head just look outside, and I get that quite a bit anyway. I just want to have a look and sit and look at the stars, and I'm lucky to be able to see it from my bed. But I just got nagged in my head like just look outside. So I leaned back and looked up, and you could see Mars because I'm a big nerd. I've always got Skyscanner 24 and Stellarium on my phone, so I can be like, "What's this?" and eliminate any things that I might be up there that are perfectly normal. So I looked out and I looked at Mars, which was orange, but there was another thing that looked exactly like it. This orange dot, the same size as Mars, just diagonally down from it. So it was really weird. So I pulled out Stellarium, which is a free app that you should get on your phone. Definitely, if you're into this sort of thing, you should have that. Um, Pointed it at Mars, and what I could see wasn't on it, which kind of made me think, oh, what? Okay, what is this? And as I thought that, it went. If this is Mars and it was here, it went around like this, and then absolutely booked it. It looked like a spark off an angle grinder. It just went pow. So that's the observables, isn't it? It had changed direction, instantaneous acceleration. But again, it was that call and response thing, which really got me interested because it's such a nebulous subject, and we can have sightings of things, and it might be a black project or some form of surveillance by somebody.
Yeah.
Um, the fact that there was that interaction was like, okay, right, this is fascinating. And I grew up near Cosford Airfield as well, so as a kid, I'd heard about the big triangular sighting that they'd had there. So yeah, it just became really fascinating to me, and a very kind of personal experience.
Yeah. Did you, you often get asked the question, well, I often hear the question asked when you see these kind of exceptional, crazy once in a lifetime things, you think that
Mhm.
doesn't make sense, that can't be human. Why didn't you pull your camera out and take a photo of it? And I feel like I know the answer to the question. It's like, well, it's because of those reasons that the last thing in your mind is to take your photo out. Sorry, to take your phone out to take a photo.
Mhm.
But I'm interested in, did you have a thought in your head of I should document this somehow, or was there no thought of that? It was just I just want to look at this because it's
Well,
interesting.
the first time, that is really interesting. A lot of people do say that they, no, I felt absolutely unbothered, or I felt terrified and I ran away. And it's almost like that manipulation of consciousness is a really integral part. Um, so the first time was literally just a whack like that. And by the time I processed what had happened, it was gone. It was just a flashbulb kind of thing. And the second time, obviously, because I'm looking at Mars at night and I've got a little Samsung, um, it 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 was probably by the time I'd looked at Stellarium and gone back and gone and then compared the two, it was sort of 4 or 5 seconds and then ping. So there wasn't really the opportunity to do it. But what I did do was screenshot Stellarium, um, and then draw the path of the thing on it, just so that I'd have it as clear as I could possibly see overlaid at that moment, and that would record the time, date, and an elevation, just in case there was something on the news about something weird happening in the atmosphere or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I took a video. Sorry, I took a video of something the other night. I was in the garden letting the dogs out for a walk, and I saw
Mm,
something in the sky, and there was something about it. It didn't move in a particular way that made me think this is anomalous or this is one of the the five. Is it the five observables? Six of the observables?
yeah,
Five observables. Well, I
something
can't.
like that.
I have
No,
to have to look back at Lily's speech there.
yeah.
But yeah, so there was nothing particularly anomalous about it, but
Hmm.
it just stood out to me. So I thought I'm going to get my phone out and I'm going to start recording. I had my phone in my pocket and I started recording it. And I thought, and I'm watching it at the same time as filming it. I'm making sure it's kind of in the screen, but I'm watching it with my eyes rather than from the screen.
Yeah,
And later on, I watched it back and I just thought that it's just such a rubbish video. It's just you
yeah.
just barely see a tiny dot in the sky. This, our cameras just aren't designed to pick things up
Absolutely not.
anyway. And I
Mm,
often get things sent to me via DMs of people that have taken a video of something or a photo of something, and
yeah,
to them it was this really exceptional moment where they've had
yeah.
this strange feeling, and it's they've captured it and they want to share it because they believe it's a true UAP. But then when
Hmm.
you look at the footage, it's just a little
Yeah.
dot in the sky, and it's like the witness testimony is what kind of makes it much more powerful. It's like, well, what were the characteristics you saw with your eyes? And I
Hmm.
find that really interesting. That you've got we it's just so difficult to kind of capture good
Yeah.
footage.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hands up. Like I've sat outside. My mum lives in Spain, and the skies there are just so clear. And I've sat outside because I love doing sort of very very amateur astrophotography on my mobile. And I've set it up and been like as good as I can. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Come on, now's the time, get something. But it's always kind of it doesn't reward every request. So yeah, it's a really difficult thing to do. Plus, I think there's probably a technical explanation for that as well, um, from the nature of some of these things. So if we accept that a percentage of this tiny percentage of anomalous things are, for example, a gravitational effect vehicle, then, like Bob Lazar says, if you create a dense enough gravitational field, like if you think about Interstellar, the view around the black hole,
Yeah.
then he said that it lenses light anyway. So you might see a saucer with your eyes, but the camera is going to the light is just going to flow around it like a drop of water going around the side of a glass. And the end effect is that you either don't see anything or it's a distortion or a refraction. I think refraction the right word? Probably not. Of the original image. So I think with that on one side, but there are people now that are modifying cameras to record in infrared and stuff like that. So I think we're definitely catching up with a point where we're going to be capturing some good data on the civilian side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of people experimenting with all sorts of things from, as you say, infrared and 3D glasses. And, also it was a bit of a phase where quite a few people were sort of putting some of that stuff out online. It was
I'm
quite interesting.
completely guilty of that. I was very tempted to get a picture frame with the red and the
Yeah.
blue on there and see if I could make some sort of absolute ramshackle infrared filter. But yeah, no good.
Well, everything's worth a go, I guess. So from the from when your interest is peaked, you've had a couple of sightings. It's
Hmm.
obviously on your mind now. What When you're looking into it, have there been a few cases that you've looked into, or a particular case that's kind of stood out to you that you've kind of gone down some rabbit holes and you've gone, I've seen this thing and that makes a lot of sense to me, or this is particularly compelling, shall we say, to you? Were there any particular cases like that?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I tend to go because it's such. First of all, I don't think we're complicated enough to actually know what it is. Um, and therefore, I really try and stay as zoomed out as I can when I'm looking into stuff. And I find it much more personally rewarding to look at differing sources and then look for overlaps. So I find that really, really rewarding to do. So I just kind of have you've got to take it. It's like John Ramirez says, accept everything but hold it lightly. Um, so I got really into ancient history, and the whole kind of Diana Pazulka angle came after it. I started with Tom DeLonge's first book,
Yeah.
not the novel, the first study guide, and by Peter Lavander, and it's phenomenal, really, really good, concise. If that's the angle that you want to look down. And then it was things like the Cosford and Calvine. You started to see perhaps trends there because it's military based at a time of conflict, and there seemed to be this new stealth technology that we got, which could drop laser guided bombs. So I thought, well, perhaps that might be an example of something that isn't spooky and weird. It might be a laser designator or something like that. And there's been a couple of YouTube videos where that seems to be their opinion as well, because that it just fits right. So after Calvine, somebody on an oil rig saw some F-111s, which are massive bombers, escorting this big black um, Calvine looking sort of diamond shaped thing. So it's more of a kind of approach like that where you're like, oh, that's really interesting. There's a tenuous but still some sort of a link worth exploring there. Phoenix Lights is fascinating. And I like to think about the psychology of these things, because I don't necessarily think in all cases that what you see is physically what's there. I think there's a lot of, again, to use a Jacques Vallée term, this kabuki theater of the shadow puppetry or Plato's cave, where we are seeing a performance, if you like. But for example, take the Phoenix Lights, which 1,000 people saw, probably more.
Yeah.
Had that have happened in daytime, that would have been Independence Day level terrifying for people. But the fact that it just turned at night and was like pretty lights in the sky, and the people that are so rigid in their worldview that don't want to get into it can just say, yeah, it was flares, whatever. Whereas the people that did see it saw something enough not to be intimidating, but spectacular enough to completely flip their lids about what was going on. So yeah, it's more the kind of zoomed out things that I'm fascinated in rather than sort of independent cases. Although I try to see it as like the best way to understand an object, if you've got loads of different types of cameras and can all get like one shot from a load of different cameras as opposed to multiple pictures from the same one. And that's what these different witness accounts. I mean, your YouTube channel is awesome for having people from different walks of life and all their different experiences, all their different environmental conditioning, seeing something weird and how they're interpreting it. So it gives you a really broad sort of catchment area. So as kind of cop out of an answer as it was, I think that's more interesting to me than just homing in on one thing because it's a bit like a religion. At some point, it was one person's take on something really weird that happened, and it's Chinese. That's it. That's all you've got to go off. So, yeah. What about you? What are your favorite ones?
Well, I think, I mean, Roswell's the OG, isn't it? It's the,
Yeah.
it's what kind of set many, it's what people go back to when you get into ufology and you think, well, I've heard of Roswell, but I'm not interested in aliens and little green men.
Hmm.
I'm not interested. But then when you start to get into the subject, that you have to look at Roswell and you have
Hmm.
to kind of have a, and I found that fascinating because all of the witness testimony from the key people, the people that the dude that was, I think Marcel, I forget his first name, but he's there holding the bit of,
Yeah.
10 it's good.
Yeah.
Years later, I was told to do that. That was
Yeah, yeah. You can even see the. I mean, it's easy to interpret and romanticize, but the look on his face where he's like,
yeah.
kind of, okay, boss, whatever. Yeah,
Is
it's his
this
one.
you're okay? Yeah.
Mm,
I mean, there's so many witnesses that were caught on camera, not caught on camera. It sounds wrong, but whose testimony was kind of immortalized on it, and it'll always be there. You'll always be able to go back to that footage and
mhm,
see what they say, and they were there, they experienced it. The fact that you've got front page news about the object that was recovered, and then all the stuff that's come after when you look at all of that from a kind of an evidential point of view, as a what's more likely to have been, is it more likely to have happened or not happened? You
yep.
have to kind of, you got to go on the side of it has happened because there's way more evidence to say that it has than it hasn't, if that makes sense.
Mm,
So I always found that case really fascinating. But yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. We've got Rendlesham, we've got I mean, because being in the UK, it's kind of our Roswell, isn't it?
yeah.
It's
Hmm.
always fascinating to me. It's also the link to, lots of American witnesses over here.
Hmm.
And just the fact that they were really credible people who have then kind of come forward, sometime later to say, yeah, this is what we saw and this was pretty outrageous.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, that I found that fascinating. But I think, it's got to be, Commander Fravin. I think the fact that Alex Dietrich and you've got these super credible people, and I think
mm,
Dave Fravor being, a Top Gun pilot, and then having
absolutely.
all of the other stuff that came with it afterwards, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a really useful case for me and
Mm,
for other people to look into, because it's like, if you're one of these people that you're not interested in that kind of UFO stuff, late night TV, cases where people are just out in a farm somewhere, and you find it difficult to believe them because they're not credible for whatever reason from your
mhm.
social conditioning. I can't trust that person because social conditioning says I can't, but
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
police officer or there's a military officer, I can trust them. Fine,
Mm,
that's fine. Well, here's a case where you've got, military personnel, you've got intel people, you've got radar operators, etc., etc. Um,
absolutely. Their
um,
lives depend on identifying things in the air. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
you couldn't have a better person. I think you made a great point then because I know that the modern way of thinking, Lou Elizondo, for example, says that there's kind of it's not that there's no point looking at the older stuff, but our sensor ability or ability to detect the stuff now is so better that and it's going on all around that we may as well look now. But if you look at those old cases, you've got so much less white noise. Like anything in the sky prior to 1900s is weird because we hadn't got a flying machine then.
yeah.
Anything in space prior to 1940 is weird, and when you get a film camera where somebody's just gone bonk and caught a snapshot of something in a pre-digital editing Photoshop age, it's got to have a lot more to get from it and a lot less kind of opportunity for obfuscation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's get into it then. I want to. I mean, you kind of answered earlier on, and it was a bit of a cop out, if I'm honest. So I'm
Yeah,
going to ask you again. What do you more specifically this time? And I appreciate
yeah,
you might not have you might not have formed an opinion on it fully.
yeah.
Have you got a? Are you going in a direction? Is there a direction of what you think this represents? UAP UFO. Are you? Is it kind of taking you towards a certain area?
Yes. So I will. I hate speculating conclusions. So I will say this is total speculation. And I know this isn't based on an educational background, but I think we've got multiple things going on. Um, it would appear that there is a an orb-based phenomena that's going on. It would appear that there is a craft-based phenomena that's going on. It would appear that there's a military thing. Obviously, that I mean, we can take that for granted. It's just a case of what it is and how to eliminate it. Um, and I, um, I, yeah, I think it's there's no harm in saying I think we are a lot weirder than um we take for granted. Uh, and I find music and things like that absolutely fascinating. But because we're kind of born into it and immersed in it, we just totally take it for granted. But a collection of vibrations like wiggly air can put you in a good mood, or it can, if you've got somebody that's really angry and you play them their favorite song, it will just drop them down a gear. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we're just immersed in that world all the time, we just like the sky's blue. We just go, oh, cool. Well, it is because it is. Um, so yeah, jump into the end of it, and this is total speculation, but I think it's we're in such a Goldilocks position, um, and we aren't seeing things that we're aware of on other planets have like nearly made it, which makes it hard for me to believe that we just rolled a dozen sixes all at once and here we are, absolutely sweet spot. Um, that would make it like the heaven of the entire universe if we're here and it all works. So I do feel that we are in some form of um, not artificial because it is real and tangible, but I think that something beyond us um, has a lot more control over us and this reality than possible. And the best way, I mean, for example, if you're trying to teach your dog something, you can't just explain to it the ins and outs of the situation. You teach it with a treat here and a telling off there if it needs one and whatever. So like Gary Nolan said about interacting with ants, you'd have to use pheromones and flavors and stuff like that. So I think something more complicated than us has more or less engineered this environment and thing that we are. Um, and that rather than on the consciousness side, having seen particularly like my mum over and over and over again giving people really specific information that she has no idea who they are. Like even walking down the street, she'll tap me on the shoulder and say, "Go and tell that woman she left a credit card in Superdrug," and stuff like that. That's ridiculous science. But that tells me that because it's extra cognitive, it's coming from somewhere else. So rather than us being a consciousness trapped in a little body, I think it's more likely that matter is suspended in a field of consciousness, and that's how we get like quantum entanglement and all of these things that are kind of awkward to explain with science because science is all about provability and the ability to kind of update your findings based on cause and effect, and this seems to be the antithesis to that. So you know what I mean? It's I think first of all, I don't think we're complicated enough, but I think there's a mixture of actual stuff, little Marvin the Martians in their flying saucers tootling over because we would do that. I think there's probably things probes because that's what we would do. I mean, if you lived in the sea and you saw a mini sub go past, you'd say, "What the hell kind of creature is that?" Um, and I think that there is a lot to do with the Earth that we don't understand. But I understand so little of that. I hesitate to speculate, but these things like orbs and things like CE5, where you can, something can appear, like your environment can react to you. Or Chris Bledsoe, for example, describe that. I mean, he has a relationship with this stuff, and I just think it's like if we're all kind of tuned a little bit differently in terms of our personalities and stuff, he must be just dialed in to whatever it is that these, I think they're plasma based, um, little gribblies and stuff that keep turning up and floating around are. So bit of a big one there, but yeah, I think that's in general what it's all about.
Mm. So everything, a bit of everything.
Yeah, so in general, I think it's
But I think
everything.
no, I think you're completely right. I think you're on the right track. I think that it's just so big and vast that we just,
Massive.
of course, a civilization somewhere would send a probe over because we do that. You
Yeah.
know, we will do that forevermore, I should imagine, while we're still able to. And that's kind of base level stuff. I think that's what people can kind of accept because it's kind of nuts and bolts. They can wrap their mind around the idea of someone far, far away. Yeah,
Mm,
there's probably a universe, sorry, probably another planet that's able to sustain life. They've created technology. They've
yeah.
managed to send technology over, maybe a bit more advanced than us. They can get their head around that. But then everything else, it's a bit sort of woo, I guess. It's kind of like I
Yeah.
can't I can't understand it, so I'm not going to think about it. But
Uh, yeah. I mean, to carry on rambling, Jeffrey Mishlove, who's a legend, and Russell Targ, absolute hero. They introduced me via their shows to this concept of the white crow. It being something that's really weird that makes you kind of snap out and pay attention to it. So those in a field that you don't understand, sometimes it's the really weird stuff that allows you to set that barrier, that boundary, if you like, for things to look from. So, for example, with the Tic Tac, because we don't know what it was and we've got nothing mechanical to compare it to, what I find most interesting about it is the fact that it knew where his cap point was, which is the point where the F8 teams enter or exit their training area. And it was 60 miles away. And the second that it pinged away from him, it appeared there. So that again tells me like, oh, okay, so that's a manipulation of consciousness. Apart from being this awesome thing that we've got on radar to keep science people fired up, there's always just that little bit of, yeah, but go on, explain this then.
mm,
You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely. Is there any do you have any specific are there any characters within ufology, within the UFO community, in inverted commas, that you kind of trust or don't trust, or you kind of there are certain people that you think I'm kind of I feel more connected with them. I feel like they're on the right track. I feel like they're a useful source of information, or they're kind of going somewhere. And equally, is there, are there particular people? And obviously, I'm not trying to get you to kind of fall there,
Don't slander some of your
yeah.
guests.
But I'm interested in whether or not there are sort of certain people. You don't necessarily need to name anyone if you don't want to, but if there are people, certainly if that's a part of the subject, that there are people that you feel unintentionally putting things out there to muddy the waters or to send us, off into a different direction.
Ooh, well, that is a spicy question, and it's a really good question. I actually thought about this today when you told me that we were going to be recording this. I thought I want to ask him, like, because when we were in school, you'd think about who your super group was and like pick your favorite musicians, and I was like, so who's the UAP Avengers for you? Um, I like to keep it really different. So you kind of imagine a Mad Hatter's Tea Party. I would have either Joe McMoneagle or Russell Targ or Jeffrey Michelot for the firmly like open to everything spiritual side. Um, Gary Nolan can do no wrong in my opinion, because he's just ruthlessly this side of the line for me in terms of the kind of the woo, if and I could class the woo as when you get the bloody X Files music and CGI little gribbly aliens in the background and stuff like that. So it keeps it a a useful discussion. And So yeah, people from different walks of life. Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon. Chris Mellon, I think, is amazing because he just tells it like it is and just doesn't care. And he's so blunt with his opinions, but that's because he knows the score.
Yeah.
So there's people like that that I find really fascinating. Plus, I love like Ross Coulthard and George Knapp for their ability to roll with the punches. Plus, I'm saying that because I messaged George Knapp yesterday and I got a reply back, which made my week. Legend. So yeah, I try and mix it up to be honest, but those guys are definitely up there with my you see it. Diana Pazulka is another one because I find that side fascinating. So they're the podcasts I definitely lock in on. As for the other side of the seesaw, I'm not going to name names because I think the worst thing that we can do, and guitarists are the worst for this. It's like, oh, I play a different shaped one. You're an imbecile. You don't know what you're talking about. Whereas actually, we both like guitar. Nobody's talking about this for a career or whatever. You know what I mean? We've all got an interest in it. So I'm not going to knock anybody that I don't necessarily agree with. I don't really like the approach that some of the media's got, which some of your guests have mentioned, where it's all a bit like screaming around in pickup trucks and letting off fireworks and you know what I mean, like the ghost hunt thing kind of thing. It's like that most haunted stuff was just the discredit that that did to the field of kind of actual sensible mediums or people that are genuinely interested in that side. Um, the same applies to UAP. Plus, militarily, let's say, for example, you've got some fantastically strange looking craft that can operate in an enemy environment. It is logical that you would fan the flames a little bit and be like, oh, no idea what that is. It's definitely strange when it's probably something with a military functional use.
Mm.
So I think professional obfuscation, um, there are people that have come out and said that that was their job. Um, and it's just a no-brainer that there are people out in the mix to kind of muddy the water a little bit. Who they are, I will leave to your discretion. But
Very diplomatic, Tom. Very diplomatic. Good
well,
answer.
I
Good
don't
answer.
want to upset somebody that you might interview in a couple of weeks. What do you think? Who are your all stars?
Well, I hate. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you, and I'm not. I don't know. I don't know who's in this for the right reasons, who isn't.
Mm,
It's just interesting to me because there is. You'll see the arguments. This person is a plant. This person is misinformation. That's their
mm,
job. This person's don't listen to that person. Listen to this person. And there's this massive divide
yeah.
within. I hate referring to it as the UFO community because it's bigger than that. But to people that talk about UFOs, UAP on a regular basis, UFO
Mm,
Twitter and that and so forth, there is this. It's almost like the positive communication, progressing the subject forward, is kind of being sidestepped sometimes and pushed aside so that we can spend so much of our time and energy discussing who we can trust and who we can't trust and who's in it for the right reasons.
mm,
And it just does my head in, to be honest. I just kind of switch off from that. Well, yeah, okay, but what are they saying? And is there any evidence to that? Does it point to
yeah.
something else? Is there anything in that that's useful? That's what
Hmm.
I'm interested in. It doesn't matter that they used to be an intel officer, or it doesn't really matter,
Absolutely.
and there's an argument for all of that stuff. You're somebody that used to be an intel officer, and this is, I'll have my little rant now. This is, you'll often hear that, well, this person used to be in the Pentagon, or they were an intel officer, and their job was, misinformation or counter espionage or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Therefore, they can't be trusted. Well, it's going to be, if we're going to get any information from anybody,
Hmm.
in order for that information to be credible, they would have had to have been in a position to know that information. And so they would have had to have been within those kind of intel communities or wherever
Yeah.
in order for them to be able to have and see and feel and touch that kind of information or have access to it, I should say. So
Hmm.
it's kind of counterproductive. Say not taking any of that information into consideration
Mm.
from those people. That's the way I see it. So there probably is people that are out there just throwing in nonsense for the sake of it and muddying the waters, but we're never going to know who they are because they're
No.
good at it. You know, they're
Yeah, totally.
they're well trained.
Totally.
I think all that we can do is just listen to the information and then make up our own minds and cross-reference it with other things and, put the puzzle together.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
100%. What one thing that I kind of occurred to me that I found really useful because there are it's such a shotgun subject and you can get lost in the weeds on ancient history and all that kind of stuff, or you can look at just the purely mechanical side. And I found that you can kind of split this field into three main areas, and there's um, recording sightings and analyzing that from your witness um, accounts. Then, but in a way, like the strength of that is you get a diverse data. The downfall of that is that, yeah, for example, if you stand by the side of a motorway or a freeway all day recording cars that go past, you'll never actually understand what it is. You'll know what they look like and sort of how many people are in and stuff, but you won't actually know what that thing is that's going past. Um, then you've got another entire wing, which some people only focus on, which is obfuscation and kind of this whodunit thing with the government and the Wilson Davis notes and people falling out of windows and all of that, the James Bond stuff, which is fascinating. But in my opinion, that is a complete cul-de-sac in terms of like we've never found out anything about all of these conspiracy theories. Obviously, people throw that term at, but there's so much stuff that the government's done which is pretty obviously terrible. And you're not going to find out about it. It's as simple as that. That's the one thing they're best at is stopping you finding out about that stuff. So you might get the odd little bit of breadcrumbs and sensation here and there, but you're never going to go, ha ha, I've cracked it.
yeah,
Um, and the other side is like, what is it then? Kind of going past the whole taxonomy of sightings and stuff is to just try and understand what is going on. And that can take so many different forms from the descriptive side to kind of the consciousness side or anything like that. The more nebulous stuff. The downside of that, of course, is that that's the least scientific side. So that's the least observable and provable part. But it seems to be the part that interacts with people the most. So
yeah.
yeah.
Do you think that with that said, so obviously you mentioned about having government and intelligence who are really, really good at hiding this stuff. With that said, and with that in mind, why do you think we're now seeing a lot of people from within those kind of communities or previously within those communities kind of coming forward and saying actually there is something there and there is secrecy and we do need to be more transparent? Because if you look at the stuff that's come out from the Soul Foundation, I know it was the conference was back in, I want to say November, I think it was, but the footage and stuff is only last couple of days they've put it out. There's a
Hmm.
lot of previous intel people that are there
Yeah.
quite openly saying, this is real.
Mm.
We've known about it for a long time. We need more transparency. So why do you think, do you get an idea as to why we are seeing that now? Why some, certainly some, are appearing to push for transparency, whereas previously it was just we lock it down, it's our information, we don't share it.
Absolutely. That is a great question, and I don't think there's one answer to it. I think you've got multiple factors. So um, you've got the kind of fingers burned people. Like, for example, I worked in hospitality for 25 years. Absolutely loved it, was totally immersed in that world. Now, that idea of going back into that world is totally abhorrent to me. So there's that. If you've worked in counterintelligence your whole life and then you retire and you realize, you know, this is just going to carry on forever, and I've not done something to be proud of here. I think that's a factor in some people. I mean, if you're holding a secret, the test pilots, for example, they call it a lifetime of service behind the green door. You may see their service patch if you Google it. It's just a hooded little figure with a knife. It's crazy. Um, so I think that must weigh so heavily on you when you can't tell your family and friends. And frankly, as technology increases, our quality of life isn't increasing. The ease of life is better than ever with healthcare and the ability to video call friends around the world and stuff like that. But in terms of happiness, I think that's a much more nebulous thing to measure. So as these people are like Roswell, for example, going to their deathbeds, knowing that there might be alternate energy sources or hope, God forbid, you know what I mean? If there's something bigger at play, um, that probably has a massive weight on people. So there's people coming forward to that. Plus, I think there's a lot of good people, your David Grushes and whatnot, that weren't really interested in it, but all of a sudden opened the wrong door at some point in their job, and they're just doing the right thing. I mean, a taxpayer, wherever you are, the government is there to serve you. And therefore, just as you've said, that we shouldn't know how to build atomic bombs, but we should know that they exist. I think a lot of people see it from that mentality. And I think that's probably Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon's angle. They've seen this going on and they're like, come on, this is just unnecessary. But also, I think society is changing. If you look at like woke is a bad word now for some reason because it's sort of the pendulum's gone too far. But if you look at human society in the 80s, which is where I grew up, it was far more kind of in some parts it was brilliant, but we weren't afraid to. There was a lot more kind of open ignorance and nudie calendars on the wall in a garage and stuff like that. And I think we are a lot more sensitive. I think we're a lot more self-focused now rather than looking after each other in like 60s, everyone thinking of community. But I do think we're a lot more sensitive. And I think that that's probably a reason why it's more appropriate now to get this out because I think things are kind of changing. It seems to be that the phenomena, and certainly these orbs and stuff like that are ramping up almost exponentially. So it just seems like those things are all aligning at once. Call it a synchronicity, if you will, but I think it's something to do with that. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Uh, I don't know. I mean,
I know
I'm
that was a bit of a ramble, but
no, it made perfect sense, and I think I agree. There's definitely a lot of psychology in there, isn't it?
mm,
It's that simple kind of, well, why if they know, then we should know, and the psychology around the gatekeepers that do know, well, they probably feel like or believe that they're doing what they're doing is for the right reasons. They're being patriotic. They think it's for the best. But then there are other people, as you say, that they're coming to a point where perhaps they've left and they're this information. They have this kind of moment where they think, well, I could better my life and my family's life,
mm,
unity that I live within. If we could improve some of this technology and improve the quality of life from the technology and so forth. So I guess there's all of that. But for me personally, I think we're getting progress now because, and I know I've said this a few times, but maybe to go into a bit more depth, because we've got people who know how to get things done are now on our side, basically.
mm,
Whereas before we had kind of people who deep into the subject and were good at kind of networking and putting out TV shows and getting people on camera and getting people talking about the subjects on perhaps a history channel or on late night cable TV, or perhaps starting some websites and some newsletters and
mm,
things. You've got your Stephen Greer and you've got Richard Dolan, people like that have been deep in the subject for a long time, have
yeah,
set up the people's hearing, the disclosure hearings, decades ago to try and get the stuff out. But they weren't within those communities. They didn't know how it worked in the intel world. They didn't know how it worked in
mm,
in Congress, and how the and military, within these kind of military slash kind of um private corps where they kind of work together and they give them stuff and they build things for you know for military weapons and what have you. Whereas now we're seeing lots of people who were in that world that have come out of that world and said, "Yeah, I've seen some stuff, I've heard some things. I wasn't within those specific programs, but I've spoken to these people that were, and I've seen some strange things,
Mm,
and therefore I want to get this declassified, or okay, well we need this declassified, but we can't. Well, I want to speak to this person, but they can't come forward because there's no whistleblower legislation. Well, let's create some, and they know how to and how to kind of negotiate with Congress and lawmakers." And so once you've got that kind of momentum going, you know how it works, then you start to see the progress that we've seen. And people like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, you know, they were kind of key players in getting the footage released for the
mm,
2017 New York Times article. And then, you know, the New York Times article came out, went to the right people who were sort of deeply interested in the subject, you know, Leslie Keane, etc. So you've got that momentum building from that point onwards, and that
mm,
started because of, you know, Elizondo and Mellon,
mm,
essentially. And I know there are a few others involved as well, but same again a couple of years later with David Grush. You know, he was an insider. He had that information. He knew he was involved in creating the whistleblower legislation, the wording of the
mm,
legislation that
mhm.
ultimately he then used to,
Yeah.
you know, and that's it's a fascinating point, but had he not had that legislation in place that he helped draft, then he wouldn't have been able to come out and speak and do what he's
Yeah.
done. And you know, the snowball effect of him coming forward, and then you've got James Lukatsky, and you've got you know, Eric Davis a bit more. Eric Davis has always been fairly tight-lipped, but he's
Yeah.
always kind of hovering around the kind of UFO community and the podcast.
Yeah.
It doesn't I think we'll probably hear more from him. Uh,
Yeah.
just a
Colin Kelleher as well.
yeah.
I'm watching you. He's always there. There's so many of these bombshell podcasts, so he's just in the background, just being quiet, just being a lovely guy. You're like, you've seen some stuff. I know it. Come on. Philippines. I think a contributive, if that's a word, point to what you just said though is if you look at how humans share information now, um, pre-internet, which is when I'm from, it was the radio, it was the news, and it's so much easier to control the flow and the exact data that's coming out. But now that people have got Reddit and smartphones and social media, it, and also after you know, things that have gone on where we're at a point where global faith in their own government is at an all-time low. So I think they've kind of lost control of the reins in terms of what the discussion is. So it makes sense to because I have this I find it fascinating because I love like Flight of the Navigator and the Spielberg films and stuff as a kid. And when you look at that now with an interest in this hobby and 20 years of perspective, you go, that's no coincidence. You know, it's ridiculously accurate. So it sort of gets you used to it's like that spoon feeding it, just drop it in. It's almost how UAP interacts with us. It's like, oh, just have a little bit there, have a little bit there. But then you can walk into a Weatherspoons pub and people are talking about the multiverse and stuff like that now. So I think there's a lot of that that's gone on through history, but now we're at a point where you just go on Instagram and there's people's accounts. You know, like that's the beauty of your Instagram to kiss your backside for a sec, because it's so many different snapshots of all of this witness data, and even if we very conservatively say 5% of them are actually real, that's 5% that's world changing, and
Yeah.
there's no filter on that. Someone's just gone, this is weird, I don't understand it, bang. So that you know, there's only so many holes in the dam that you can stick a thumb in
Yeah.
before something destructive happens to their constructed narrative. So
Why do you think that, with that said then, so we've got this improvement in how we communicate, we've got social media, we've got a massive shift in our ability to just go instant to the other side of the world and just talk to someone. Why does it seem to be, and maybe you have a different take on it, but why does it seem to be very focused on America, and why are we in the UK? Why is it kind of we're slowly I think we're slowly catching up, but we're still quite a way behind in terms of people talking to each other about it being in the media, it being in adverts, Super
Yeah,
Bowl, who are we? Martin Scorsese, how could I forget that name? Martin Scorsese's Super Bowl advert, massive
yeah,
advert position in well that there is that exists really in the middle of the
absolutely.
Super Bowl. They've got that. They've got the Congress. They've got Congress men and women who are talking about the subject. They've got legislation going through. It's
Hmm.
front page of a number of newspapers. Over here in the UK,
Hmm.
doesn't really seem. We every now and again, maybe the Guardian will pick up a story, maybe a lot,
Yeah.
the Daily Mail or whatever, but there's not much. I wonder why, if you get a take on why that is.
Um, so I'm not going to get political, but I think it's got quite a bit to do with UK politics. If we're talking about the UK, first of all, like the UK is the size of some states
Mm.
in America, so it's a much smaller group of people with their hands on the pie, so to speak. And frankly, like we've been in America's back pocket with the Five Eyes and stuff like that. It has been said before that the CIA can't spy internally on America, so it spies on us, and we and the other Five Eyes, surveil Americans, and that's how they get around that kind of thing. Call that a conspiracy theory, whatever. It's a possibility, but it's a definite fact. I mean, we only finished paying off our war debt to the state in 2020. So we definitely stand where they tell us to stand. We've sold our navy and all that. We're entirely dependent economically and militarily on their support. So I just don't think we want to rock any boats. Plus, for our smaller country, I don't think it does the current narrative any good. Because if you're talking about faith in government, it's pretty bad here. You've got to admit. I don't think they would want to alienate themselves, to use a pun, any further by saying, "Here's a really divisive thing that's happened." So I think it's got a lot more to do with politics than any other motivation. But I'm fascinated in your thoughts because obviously you're a Brit too.
Yeah, I think that we're just a couple of years behind them with everything, with
Yeah.
every kind of phase and theme, and yeah, I think we're just 2 years behind in
Mm.
everything that we do in music, in culture, and
Mhm.
not that they've got better culture than we have, just in terms of things that are happening, we're a couple of years behind, and then we start doing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's the thing, and also we're quite reserved in the UK. I think it's kind of a fun subject to talk about,
Yeah.
more so over there, whereas over here it's kind of a bit more you're a bit strange than if you're interested
Yeah,
in.
definitely. One thing about Brits is like you can be having the worst day of your life and you bump into somebody and they're like, "Oh, hi, how are you?" And you're like, "Fine." So I think
Having a
we're a
great.
lot more prepared to, in the name of being polite and fitting in, kind of just be like, "Yep, this is absolutely my reality," and without going into the details.
What I do find strange though is that we've seen that it quite clearly is a bipartisan issue in America, where
Mm,
you've got politicians from the Republican Party and the Democrat Party who are equally interested. They, Rounds and Schumer put the
mm.
legislation together with, I know, a few others, Gillibrand, etc. So it's not like it would be, in my opinion, it's not like it would be a divisive subject for politicians to talk about, because it's kind of, it's not one side or the other, really, is it? It's not a blue issue, or like in the UK, a red issue,
No.
a yellow issue. I don't know what colours we've got in the UK, but you know what I mean. The different political parties.
Exactly. Who even knows what's going on over
So
here?
I kind of feel like it's a safe subject for them, other than the ridicule side of it, in terms of politically.
Mm.
I guess that is part of politics, isn't it? You don't want to be ridiculed, and you want to be a serious, talking about
Yeah,
key
yeah. Plus,
subject.
it's an election year, isn't it? So I think if you look at it in a really lame, two-dimensional, just trying to win a race way, now's not the time to get on.
Yeah.
Now's the time to smash each other with facts or whatever and have these points of difference and try and win over a populace rather than saying, we both agree on this thing. Incidentally, I think it's probably from an outsider and an ignorant person. I think it's the most healthy thing I've seen from America in years because, the world's burning in terms of humanity and how people are doing. But when you're finally seeing people on different sides, AOC and oh, what's his name? Legend, Tennessee, that brought
Burchett.
it to Congress. Tim Burchett, yeah. Them just being like, yeah, they're good people. They're there with their arms around each other. That's the message that people need to be getting now, instead of arguing over policy and forced.
Bringing people together, isn't it? This is it. It's a subject that's
Absolutely,
bringing people together that ultimately has a really positive potential kind of outcome where that
yeah.
develop things that would help humanity, bring people together, potentially kind of stop unnecessary wars if we realize that we're one species
Mm,
and individuals separated by a bit of land. it
yeah.
it's a positive for me. I think it's a positive time, and it certainly looks like it's bringing people together. It's one of those very few subjects that is bringing
Mm,
people together, and yes, I see that from in the videos that you stick up on UAP Files Instagram feed, and there'll be people completely different, clearly completely different politically
mm.
minded, but they would totally agree on certain things, but they're all wanting the same, which is some disclosure, some understanding of what this is, and they kind of come together for that, even though they're totally different politically, and that's really nice to see. You don't really see that with any other subjects, apart from perhaps music and film, things like that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point. And the UAP, UFO, call it what you want, field, um, uh, it seems to be, and I think this is part of it. It happens globally. I mean, when we talk it part of the law, it goes back to Antarctica and things like that. Operation High Jump and whatnot. So it's on every bit of the planet that we inhabit. Somebody's seen something weird. So it is culture irrelevant. It's a human experience rather than an American or
Yeah,
whatever. And I think that's one of its most powerful motivators.
beautiful. Well, I think that's a really nice place to end, isn't it? A bit of positivity. I like that.
Yeah. Why not, man?
I
I've
like
really enjoyed it, and thanks. I can't thank you enough. Like it's mind blowing the fact that I'm here having a chat and kind of getting to interact with some of the people in this world. So I'm
oh,
really grateful to you, man.
I appreciate you talking to me and coming on, and just your help in general, being a good friend. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your time. Right, dude. In that case, I'll call it a wrap there. Take care of yourself, man. I'll speak to you soon.
Catch you later, brother.